the cloud. I would like to welcome everybody to our National Businesswomen's Week Women in Transition panel discussion. I'm Sheila Berry Oliver. I'm president of BPW Florida, and we have 4 wonderful panelists with us this evening who have a variety of experiences in career transitions, and hopefully everybody will find something interesting and informative in our discussion. I would like to ask everybody to mute yourselves if you haven't already done so. And I think that's probably the only logistics that I need to cover. Let me just start by saying that National Businesswomen's Week was first observed in 1928. BPW USA President Lena Madison Phillips opened the week with a nationally broadcast speech. National Businesswomen's Week was moved to the 3rd full week in October in 1938 and honors the contributions of working women and employers who support working women and their families. And this is obviously the first day of the 3rd full week in October. I know a number of our LOs have special events going on this week, and we decided that we would start the week off with a virtual event sponsored by BPW Florida, because we do have LOs spread around the state. One of BPW's signature programs is Women in Transition. BPW Foundation research found 3 types of transition-based forces that shape workplaces and workforces: life cycle-induced transitions, career-focused transitions, and market or workplace-induced transitions. This evening, we're going to focus on career-focused transitions, which occur as employees move along the continuum of their career, requiring and or wanting new skills and experiences that can enhance their employability and success. This is a topic that frankly has a great personal reasoning for me. I had 3 parts to my career. The first part was in the corporate world, and I worked in both line and staff positions in 4 different organizations and 3 different parts of the country. The second part of my career was in higher education, and I worked both full-time and part-time, teaching both online and in person for 4 different universities. And I'm in the 3rd part of my career, which is otherwise known as retirement. So along the way, I've had a number of different positions, locations, and experiences. So this is a topic that very much resonates for me. What I would like to do is ask each of our panelists to briefly describe her career transitions, be they positional, functional, organizational, geographic, business sector, or any other. And I'm going to do this the way I grew up, which is to start alphabetically using last name. So let me start, therefore, first with Tiki Bates. Tiki?
Thank you, Sheila, for having me here. My career-focused transition has taken a long time to happen, I think. I've been in the industry I'm in for almost 30 years, but I started, and after about a year, I was also going to school, and I didn't know I wanted to be in the industry I'm in. And after about a year, I realized that I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to move up the so-called ladder in this industry. And although I knew it was a male-dominated industry, I knew it would be challenging. There would be difficulties along the way. But as a woman, I could see that in the death care industry, that families just, they embrace the feminine touch of talking about end-of-life conversations. So I can say I started out in education, going to school. It transitioned into an everyday job, what I thought was an everyday job, and then into actually focusing on making it my career and educating myself to get the certification that I needed to be higher up in that industry and to eventually own my own business. And that's sort of how 30 years have gone by pretty quick, but that's about how I have transitioned.
Okay, thank you. Next would be Amanda Cummins.
Thank you. My name is Amanda Cummins. I am currently a licensed Florida attorney. I'm admitted to practice law in all states in Florida, the Middle District of Florida, which is federal court, and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is also federal court. My practice focuses primarily on estate planning, probate, and special needs. I'm getting into the area of paternity as well, because there's a lot of overlapping. So my career transition was from a judge advocate in the Marine Corps, which is almost 100% male dominated. There was only 3 female judge advocates in the entire region that I was in. So I was a prosecutor dealing mostly with sex crimes and computer crimes involving children, and transitioned out of the military into education, where I taught at a local middle school for 3 years, and now I'm transitioning back into the legal field. My career transition was not voluntary. I was diagnosed with a bunch of medical conditions that resulted in me being medically retired from the military. And that's something that I've struggled with since about 2016. I've had some pretty severe medical issues. So my transition wasn't voluntary, but I needed to find a career path that would enable me to take care of my health. And that's why now I work for myself. I'm able to focus on my health and pursue my career goals while ensuring that it doesn't cause any health issues.
Okay, thank you. Next would be Patricia Millian.
Hi, everybody. I'm Patricia. I'm from the Upper Keys LO. On paper, it might look like I haven't had a lot of transitions. I have a degree in business with a marketing major, and I've been in marketing for almost 40 years now. But the reality is there have been quite a few transitions within that. Marketing is a very broad field with a lot of different aspects to it. So a job can change, marketing jobs can change dramatically even within the same organization. So a few of the transitions that I have made, for example, I started on what they call the agency side. I worked for a marketing agency servicing clients in banking and healthcare and retail. It was very much a writing centered role, marketing content. And then eventually I transitioned to in-house marketing, corporate marketing, where I was more helping a sales team generate leads and close sales. There was a heavy focus more on branding and trade shows and print ads, presentation decks and things like that. I also transitioned mid-career from consumer-based marketing to more business-to-business marketing, which is also very different. I went a couple of years, I was self-employed as a marketing consultant. And now I've been at the same company for almost 20 years, but I've done everything from managing direct marketing, e-commerce, product development, database analysis, creative teams, sales and service departments. So I've touched just about every area of the business. And then most recently, I voluntarily started to transition from a senior position to a reduced role. I work 4 days a week now. And really my primary role is to coach and mentor emerging leaders as part of succession planning. So over the next couple of years, I will continue to narrow my scope and my time until I can wean myself entirely from my corporate career, which sounds dreamy, but also has its challenges.
Thank you. And now Ronelle Montgomery.
Hi, I'm Ronelle Montgomery, and in my current position, I am the Vice President of Economic Inclusion and Business Growth with the St. Pete Chamber. And we have an economic resource called the Greenhouse, and I'm a co-manager. I started my transition in Florida in customer service. That was kind of what I was doing. I'm originally from California. And from there, I transitioned to financial services, started from processing new accounts to becoming an account supervisor, new account assistant supervisor in the financial services industry. And then I transitioned to nonprofit. and nonprofit was the area I stayed in the longest. And that was kind of starting off as a receptionist and working my way through to doing marketing. So I understand that marketing piece, and I realized marketing was not what I wanted to do as a whole because there was so many different areas. I couldn't narrow down what I wanted to do. But so as a part of that, I stayed in nonprofit for about 14 years, doing community outreach and marketing for that organization. And based on relationships I built and volunteered, when it was time to transition from there, I started with the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce. And I've been with this organization for probably about 3 years, but prior to that, I was on the board and volunteering. So different mini transitions and just using relationships and other activities to kind of guide me in that. So thank you. Nice to have me. I'm glad. Nice to have me here. Thank you for having me here.
I'm glad to have you all here, actually. Let me start with asking each of you to talk about how your career transition contributed to your career success. And let me start with Patricia, if I can.
Sure. So at work, I lead a training session for the young career professionals on how to manage their careers. And the best piece of advice that I give in that workshop is to treat your career like a game of chess and not checkers. So it's very easy, especially early on, to focus on the very next opportunity, right? What's the very next promotion, the very next raise, whether that's an internal opportunity or an external opportunity. And if you do that for too long or too early, you can wind up as a specialist in what's a narrow field. And this is true in marketing. It may not be true in every field, but in marketing, this is certainly true because there are so many different paths to go down. So if you keep looking for this next position that's going to leverage what you know and give you a big raise, you can end up a specialist, which is great if that's what you intend. But you can also hit a ceiling without really meaning to, without intending to. So one of the things that I did almost organically, because I'm just a voracious learner, I always want to learn something new. And I wanted a more general leadership role. So one of the things I did was I would intentionally move sideways or even backwards in some cases if I felt like it was going to expand my knowledge, my skill set for the long run, right? So, and to give you a concrete example, I have one of my direct reports is a very experienced database analyst. She directs a team, and that was her specialization. And she chose that path, and she pretty much is at the highest level she can be at. I never did that job, but I can direct that job because I've dabbled in enough things, right? I can direct different teams. So that was an intentional thing I did, transitioning across, and even there's at least once where I took a pay cut because the opportunity was going to give me new skills and experience. So yeah, those kinds of transitions, intentional transitions and conscious decisions certainly expanded my skills and equipped me to be a generalist who could direct multiple teams. I even one time, this was back in 2009, I gave up all of my responsibilities to lead a product development team for a web-based software product, which was really, looking back, was pretty risky, but it panned out well because I learned a lot in that 1 year of just focusing on that one product development project. And since then, I've been involved in a lot of other technology product launches. So that has really, I constantly go back to that experience and pull things from what I learned during that time. So
one of the things you said, Patricia, that particularly resonated with me is that sometimes if we only look at moving up to the next rung, if we're in the corporate environment, we can end up in a position where we've moved up the ladder and we're in a position which doesn't bring us, which we don't enjoy. And I certainly found myself in that situation. So I think the advice that you're giving in that class is a very good advice, because we have to be really careful not to, quote, be succeeding and then end up being unhappy in what we're doing. So even
Yeah,
if the
I
outside
encourage
world
people
says we've succeeded.
to try lots of different things early on, right? Once you hit a certain pay level or position level, it's harder to go backwards, go sideways. So
Yeah,
do it early and do it often.
Absolutely. So if I ask that same question of how have your career transitions contributed to your success, Tiki, what would you say?
So I'm going to say, in the industry I've been in for 30 years, I've transitioned into different opportunities. I started out in a sales position in the funeral industry, and quickly took on other areas. I did marketing. I even traveled the United States. So geographically, I was looking at how families received, how they actually experienced this industry in different areas of the United States. And I think that it was all a way of gaining knowledge in this industry. I think that, we can measure our successes differently, each of us. To me, it was about knowing that I could succeed on my own ultimately, as I am now, but knowing I could succeed and that I had gained all this knowledge along the way. During this time, even returning to school, you can go to school in the beginning and get good grades, get a job, and then to know you have to be in your 30s or older returning to school again to get a degree or a certification. It's scary, but as long as I succeeded in the transition, in these transitions, I think that's what was most exciting, is knowing that all these little successes along the way, I was achieving them. And don't get me wrong, it might have been a couple times, one step forward, two steps back, but just to continue to go, and the gratification you get along the way of these little successes to achieve your goal. And but I've just I've enjoyed all of it along the way, the good and the bad. It's always been a learning experience.
Ronelle, do you want to take this question?
Sure. I would actually say it was probably a combination of Patricia and Tiki as well, in terms of utilizing my experiences in, how do I apply them today, and how did I gain better knowledge? So I actually took a step back, even though I had, prior to joining the nonprofit industry, I had a supervisory role. And so during my whole nonprofit experience, I did not. So it was nice to take a step back. And then I took a step back further when I transitioned into economic development. And I started off as a coordinator, but it gave me, for one, the opportunity to gain relationships, authentic relationships that I'm able to use today, and to gain mentors who can help guide me as well. But I probably would not be the type of supervisor, I would say. The titles and supervisors and bosses, I don't particularly care for, but I think just based on the experience before, it's kind of what did not go right before. And as I've gotten older and gained experiences and had, through the different career transitions, be able to see a wide range of people and positions to figure out what I want to do in my next step and how do I want to engage with people. So I think with that, it's just that knowledge gain, and how can I take the best of what I've learned to be, successful in the position I'm at now. And it also helped me to hone in on what I really want to do. So I think right now, this though I have no idea if there's going to be in transition, I think where I'm at now is the perfect spot at the perfect timing. So all that I've learned prior to this, I couldn't help but say will help me succeed, just because I'm happy where I'm at.
Amanda?
I'm kind of in a similar position as Ronelle. I think the biggest thing that I learned from my career transition was how not to be if I'm in a supervisory role. Anyone who's served in the military or in a profession where you're required to work extensive hours, and I'm talking, over 10 hours a day for 5 or 6 days a week, sometimes 7, that takes a huge toll on you mentally and physically. Emotionally, it affects every aspect of your life. Definitely your health, mental, physical health. All of my career positions have dealt with human relationships. So going from a prosecutor with a very demanding boss and dealing with the failure of human relationships or very negative human relationships in the criminal and especially in the sexually based offensive field, I knew I did not want to do that. And I knew I did not want to work for that type of boss. So although my medical issues were kind of involuntary and it's a lifelong issue that I'll have to deal with, I'm very thankful that that happened to me because I was able to transition into a more balanced career where I'm my own boss, I'm in charge of my own schedule. I can take cases that I want to take and that I feel invested in. And taking that little detour into education, I was able to learn a lot about the education process. So what goes into becoming an educator in Florida and what happens in the classroom and what happens to these children with other staff members at the school. And that really helped prepare me for what I'm doing now, which is working with families, usually broken families and paternity issues. Sometimes the children have special needs, special education requirements. Understanding that aspect of what's going on with the child at school has really helped me be a better attorney, better advocate for that child in the courtroom. And it's made me super successful as a probate attorney, estate planning attorney, because I'm dealing with families that are preparing for end-of-life issues or have lost a loved one and helping them navigate a court system. So having the really negative experience in the military has taught me a lot about compassion, and it's made me a more approachable attorney. I'm very laid back. I don't like my clients to feel like they need to dress in a black tie attire to come visit me. So it's made me a lot more relatable to my clients, understanding that, hey, this attorney has dealt with something very similar that I have, or they know what my child is going through so they can help me and they can better fight for me. I think that those transitions have made me more successful in marketing myself as an individual who can better relate to whatever it is that my clients are going through.
The topic of education has come up at least once. And I know for me personally, when I got my doctorate, it opened up the whole avenue of teaching at the collegiate level, which would not have been possible if I hadn't had a doctorate. And so I'm curious, and I'm going to open this up without calling on somebody because I'm not sure it's true for everybody, but how did education and or getting credentialed contribute to any of your career transitions? I know it's true for Tiki, so I'm going to change what I just said. I'm going to call on Tiki because I know it's true for you, Tiki.
Well, it is. Education was a huge contribution. In order for me to own my own cremation business in the state of Florida and become a funeral director, I had to take courses given by higher education in college. I had to take a Florida State exam. And so I had to attend those. I had to make good grades. I had to take the exam. I mean, without it, I would not have been able to do what I do today. But I can say that I hear what Amanda says, and I know I've raised my hand because she touched on something when she says, finally, you're able to do the work you do and not have to do it the way someone else has done it, and even do it better. And enjoying who you work with and if you're working with someone else, how you want to work with them. And although I had to do those things for education to get that education, I still am able to run my business the way I would like to do it and provide family services different than anybody. And that's something I couldn't have got from education. I couldn't have got it from the schooling, but it was a requirement for my particular, occupation. So.
Does anybody else want to field that question, Ronell?
Oh, well, and earlier when Tiki was talking about going back to school, I went back to school late as well. I went back to school in 2010. And so that was an interesting dynamic in itself, and, you know, raising a daughter. But part of that was the marketing. I started off as marketing. I thought, oh, that's the industry I want to do. That's the degree, and got into it. It's like, yeah, no. You know, I didn't want to do public relations. I didn't want to do all the copy and stuff like that. So I switched to business administration, and which was great. And I would say being able to have the degree behind all that you know, and the experience, and then the education, I think was kind of the icing on the cake. And I learned a little bit more about how to approach things probably from a business standpoint by taking classes, and taking entrepreneurship classes has also helped me in terms of economic development. So I think that was a plus. And one of the things I love processes and procedures and filling in gaps and stuff like that. So I actually ended up unintentionally, but blessed to end up with 2 degrees when I graduated. I completed one, which I was on track to. And then for the second one, I actually found out when I was getting ready to graduate, I only needed 1 more class to get the 2nd degree. And I think for that one, that's a little bit more where my passion is. And that's organizational management and organizational leadership, which has helped me, you know, in the role that I'm in now, in terms of being able to you know, supervise individuals and to keep running programs. But for those who are local, we have a program called Leadership St. Pete. I think for me, that experience and being a part of that leadership program was definitely transformational, because at that time I was in the executive coordinator position, which is just, you know, you're working with everybody else to get everything completed. So I wasn't able to use my leadership skills in a way that I had previously done. But in this particular program, I did. And through that, it helped me gain the confidence that I needed to step back in that leadership role. And people were commenting that they could see the difference as well. So I think between, you know, going back to school and participating in leadership programs, that, you know, that's kind of helped me be more comfortable in the leadership positions. And I keep thinking about, do I want to go for my master's? Do I want to, and people are like, just slow down, figure out what you want to do before you just jump back into the school program. And I hear people talking about having to do papers, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. So, so we'll see what's next in that area, but I'll keep you guys posted.
It's nice to have it open-ended. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I will. I just want, maybe it's a little, I don't know. Never mind. I wanted to point out that, you know, the advanced degrees aren't always necessary, right? I feel like young people now have this sense that they have to get an advanced degree to get anywhere. And there was a time when I might have pursued an advanced degree, but I never did, because I kept moving up without it. And I have worked at everything from startups to large public corporations. And maybe if I had wanted to be a VP of marketing at a Fortune 500, I would have needed that advanced degree. But I found out that public corporations weren't really for me. And I settled in on sort of a sweet spot of medium-sized companies. Privately held was where I thrived. And I found that you didn't really need the advanced degree there. So you don't always need it. I guess that was my point. This might be a little bit, you know, counterintuitive.
That's true. That's very true. Let's move on to another question then. And some of you have touched on it, but did you create a strategy for your career trajectory? And if not, were any of your career transitions ones which you did not initiate? And what was the impact of such a transition? And I guess I'll start with Amanda, because Amanda, you were quite open about the fact that your transition out of the military was not one you voluntarily sought out.
Right. Originally, when I joined the Marines, I envision myself as a careerist. So I thought I would do my 20 years, get out, retire. But I was in for just under 7 years. And I had a very difficult time. So it was during one training exercise, like we have different schools that we have to go through for the Marines. So all officers in the Marines are what's called unrestricted line. So whatever your job is secondary to being a Marine officer, and Marines are the shock force. So we're basically all Marine officers are trained in the event of an emergency, we can step in as an infantry platoon commander and lead Marines in combat. So it was during that school that I started to notice a lot of health issues, and I ended up getting diagnosed with lupus, and I had it quite badly. It's led to a bunch of other medical conditions. Since I've gotten out, I've had multiple surgeries, and I've finally been able to get my health under control for a little bit. But like I said, it's always something that could pop back up. So the impact was I found myself at 27 years old, being medically retired from the military, knowing that I couldn't go back to work in the legal field because it's a very demanding field where you're intellectually challenged and basically your body's stressed out all the time. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to continue on that path, even though I did like being a lawyer. So going through the whole medical board process was incredibly stressful. It took about 2 years to get a medical decision that I was satisfied with, because there was a lot of back and forth about my percentage of disability. I was trying to reach a certain percent so that I would qualify for TRICARE, because my prescriptions were going to cost $4,000 a month just for one of them. And I knew no matter what job I got, that a 20% copay was not going to make that a reality for me, and I could die from my medical condition. So figuring out what I was going to do next in that 2-year period was quite stressful, but I didn't really have a plan when it happened. But I knew once I got out that I needed to kind of diversify my career experience so that if it were to happen again, where my health started kind of spiraling out of control, that I would have a contingency. So if I couldn't continue practicing law, I would have another area to fall back on. And again, that's something that helped me transition into the area that I'm doing now, because estate planning, probate, special needs law, all kind of deal with disabilities and medical issues. You can find yourself doing VA appeals, and as someone who's been through that whole process, now I can tell my clients, oh yeah, I understand what you're going through. And they're like, yeah, right, everyone says that. But then when I say, no, I was 27 years old, I was, pretty much on death's doorstep, went through the whole disability evaluation system, fought with the VA for my rating. So I do know what you're going through, and I do understand your health challenges and how it's impacting your life, not just your career, your entire life. It impacts your family, it impacts your relationships, your friendships. You can't do some of the things that you used to be able to do. I used to be super into fitness, and I don't work out at all anymore. So it impacts every aspect of your life, and having that experience really helped me understand that you may find yourself in a position where you can't do what you thought you were able to do. So what do you do now? You need to be prepared for that. You need to have a diversity of experience so that if something does happen, you can move from where you're at into where you need to be to make sure that your health doesn't spiral out of control.
I'm going to segue from that to another question we had discussed, the panelists and I, which is, what is one challenge you faced during a career transition, and how did you handle it? From someone other than Amanda, does anybody want to field that question?
I can.
Okay, go for it.
I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I'm really facing my biggest challenge right now. Right, I'll be honest. It hasn't been all smooth sailing as I've pulled back from my leadership role. I'm used to having a direct voice, right, at the executive team table and participating in strategic decisions that impact the whole organization. And I have to say, more than once, I have had to remind myself that this was my choice and that I have to accept the bad with the good. And that includes maybe knowing a little bit less than I used to, and learning to place a lot of trust in my colleagues' decisions without always knowing the full context of those decisions. So yeah, that continues to be a challenge, and something that I'm handling with a lot of, introspection and really just one day at a time. But that's it. That's the challenge at the moment.
Ronell, I think you had indicated a willingness to
say-
address this.
Yes, so prior to joining the chamber as staff, I worked for a nonprofit, as I mentioned, doing community outreach and marketing. And the organization itself had a leadership transition. And in the leadership transition, they decided to change the direction of the role that I was in, where I was pursuing my degree, but had not completed my degree at that time. But they made the position a degreed position along with some other roles and responsibilities. And I understood it was more to probably move me out of the way. But I don't think that they understood that when they did that, it actually opened a door for me because I was ready to transition. I think I just needed that push. And so when they did that, I had the option of reapplying for my job or moving on. And I decided I wasn't going to reapply. I think they probably took them by surprise, but I was figuring I was done. So I was actually unemployed for about 4 months. So that was a challenge I faced, stepping away from a job that I had held for, which I was a part of my career for 14 years, to then that, and not having a plan. And when I talk about trajectory, no plan on what was next, trying to figure out the industry, still pursuing my degree at the same time. So I would say that was the biggest challenge. And for me, I'm a faith-filled person. So it was just a matter of being faithful that I was doing what I needed to be doing at the time. And I had my sister, well, why don't you apply for this and apply for this? And I was just like, I just didn't want to just jump into anything after 14 years. I just didn't want to just take anything and then be unhappy and not, for me, fulfill my purpose. And during that time, I was actually on the board of governors at the chamber, and the chamber was always the place that I had wanted to work. But like I said, I was doing something else as I volunteered, and a position became available. Like I said, by about 4 months, which made it an easy transition into there. So it was a kind of a combination of just holding steady and not trying to do anything. But yeah, like I said, that biggest transition was somebody who thought that they were, I wouldn't say trying to get me, but, trying to make it complicated. And it was a challenge, but like I said, it led to the purpose and where I was supposed to be. So I'm glad.
Sometimes it does work out. I know in my last corporate position, I had created and led a global workforce diversity initiative. And I did that for 4 years, and that really pushed those in leadership to rethink how they were doing things. And they didn't really like being pushed the way I was trying to push them, because I was trying to push them to think differently, not in addition to behaving differently, to also think differently. So they decided they wanted somebody who was less pushy doing it. So I got pushed out, which allowed me to work full-time on my dissertation. And ultimately ended up with me teaching, which was so much more satisfying for me. But one of the hard parts of that transition between being employed full-time and being employed part-time when I was working on the dissertation was all of a sudden I became a non-entity to all the people I had worked with in the corporate environment. I could no longer give them contracts. And so that was the hardest part of it, was all of a sudden not having a say in what was happening, or having connections that were created in the workplace. And so that took a while to get used to. So one of the other things we had talked about was what role, if any, did other people play in your career transitions, either positive or negative? This could include, for example, friends, family, mentors, colleagues, or support groups. And I'm looking at the screen to see who might want to handle this first. Tiki, you've unmuted yourself, so we'll go with you first.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm not sure if I would have started my own business had it not been for family. I have a very supportive husband, and he sort of pushed me in 2008. He had pushed me and said, if you don't do it now, you never will. And so he supported my decision to transition into owning and starting my own business. Now, I had the education behind me and had, probably 15 years of experience behind me. But when you're stepping out to actually do it on your own, it's scary. I mean, it was real scary because now you're sort of quitting your job to start something that, is this going to happen or not? And you've got to make it happen. So it was scary, but I'm so thankful that my husband gave me the push and that other family were behind me and that I did it. So yeah, they were a big part of it.
I was going to comment on that. I think for me, I've been fortunate and blessed that for almost each transition, either negatively, like I said, the transition from the nonprofit into this position where people actually approached me. And I think it was based on the relationships that I had built and their understanding of how I did, how my work ethic was and watching from afar that I did not realize. And so when I transitioned, I always had somebody who said almost, except for the 4 months would be, I know this position is becoming available. I know you're transitioning out of this one. Let me make an introduction. Or I know that you're not working. I have this position. I think you're a good fit for it. So when we were talking about the trajectory, it was never all the ones that I tried to plan, all the transitions I tried to plan never worked out, but it was all based on relationships where people kind of, helped me with the next one and made the introduction or recommendation. So I've been fortunate in that way.
I can give a negative one. Leave it to me to be negative. I'm just kidding. So I have two bosses that I had in the military, and one was the worst boss I've ever had in my life. When I first got sick, they kind of gave me the whole like, oh, well, you're just a woman, so it's probably just anxiety and you can't handle the stress. And I was like, this is garbage, because if anyone knew my parents, they would know that my mom was probably missed her calling as a drill instructor. That's how like regimented she was as a mother. So it was not a matter of anxiety or, not mentally prepared for it. If anyone could have done it, it was definitely me. I was like, my mind would give out way after my body did. So I would basically like work myself to death. And so that boss kind of, when he found out that I was sick and I was going to be referred to a medical separation board, he kind of did everything he could to get in the way of me getting out, because I was one of those employees that, hey, she's really good at her job and I know that she gets her work done. And so I'm going to do everything I can to keep her here as long as possible. So instead of understanding that, hey, I have this employee, she's not able to keep up, she's doing her best to do it because she doesn't want to let the team down and make her work fall on other people's desks. So I need to find out how I can help her. There was like no attempt from him to help me out or to ease the burden of my situation or allow me to, like, even going to a doctor's appointment, I would come back into the office after a doctor's appointment and I would get talked to about how I was away from my desk. He was replaced by one of my peers who got promoted, and it was like a night and day difference. It was like, a kind older brother that was like, hey, you're my little sister. I've watched you basically suffer tremendously, and I'm going to do everything I can to help take some of that weight out of your pack. I'm going to allow you to take the time to go to the doctors and take care of your health and kind of help you out. So just having the two different bosses, I know almost most women, especially in the workplace, can relate to having a terrible boss, but there's also really good bosses that you can have that really, especially if they come from beside you and they've kind of watched what's happened to you and how you've been treated, and just give you a completely different perspective on what a true awesome leader looks like. I would say that having those two bosses has really, you know, given me a much broader perspective of what type of leader I want to be and what type of things I'm never going to do to people that I'm leading.
I would be remiss if I didn't add in here that for me, one of the organizations that has always been very supportive throughout my career has been BPW, and not so much the organization, but BPW members. Even though I was typically, when I was in information technology and management consulting, it was not a field that my BPW sisters were in. They were always there with a shoulder to cry on if it had been a negative happening at work, or to cheer me on for something positive. And I think that's one of the real strong attributes of BPW as an organization, is that BPW members really do support one another as individuals, even if they don't know the specifics about the business. They just want to be there to support you and help you. And that's probably one of the reasons why I've stayed a member for so long, is because that kind of support has always, that unconditional support has always been there. So I would be very remiss if I didn't highlight that, because it's really been true for me. Okay, I think we've got time for two more questions. One is, what is one challenge you faced during a career transition, and how did you handle it? We kind of talked around this a little bit, but in this case, it's more a question of how did you handle whatever challenge you were faced with? Does anybody want to take that on? Nobody wants to take it
I can
on.
go.
Okay.
So one, obviously health was a huge challenge I faced. And I think that's one thing that America has kind of, neglected recently. We're kind of a consumer-based culture that's focused on getting every ounce of work out of our employees that we can. And so being young and super healthy and super athletic and super fit, going from that to, I basically in the body of a 90-year-old woman who's on death's doorstep, that was kind of like a shift in my mindset. So I went from being part of the consumer rat race and having all these ambitions to be at the top of the ladder to kind of being happy where I'm at. I think that's one thing that a lot of people are always focused on bigger and better, and they're not focused on enjoying where they're at. And until you have something happen to you where you have the opportunity to kind of sit back and reflect about, why am I here and what am I doing? What is my purpose? Like Renelle said, you're always going to be chasing that next big thing, and you're not going to be focused on, yourself. You're focused on ambition, and you're not really focused on taking care of yourself. So I think that's one challenge I faced, was going from the mindset of being this super powerful, super, successful woman to just being happy where I'm at and doing what I can where I am.
Kiki?
I will say that a big challenge that I went through after I had started my business. I was my own boss, my own company. I was, going to love it all, right? It was going to be wonderful. And I found out after a few years, you get sort of lonely because you're the only one in the office to talk to. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's a different atmosphere. You know, you're not the big corporation you might have worked for. And it was around 2014 when I started looking for social groups and networking, which brings me to joining BPW. It's just, you know, I joined a group of women, like-minded women that are focused on their job, or their job could be their home as well. I'm just saying they're focused on what they're doing, people to talk to, positive people. I'm currently a member of BPW Gold Coast, and I started out as a member of BPW St. Petersburg Pinellas. But that's because I love all the girls around the Florida here. It's been wonderful to meet them all. So the challenge was that being alone in the business that you started, but then it took getting out and socializing to finding where I could talk to people about everyday things, and it really helped keep my mind going, or I felt I was going into a little rut. So that's my challenge and what I did to face it several years ago.
Sometimes it's very hard to admit that we need help. I know at one point in my career, I had gotten promoted too quickly, and I was clearly beyond what I could handle because of the politicking that was occurring at the level I'd been promoted to. And I was literally in tears driving to work every single day. And what I finally did was to seek out a psychologist to help me through it. And I'm not sure I would have made it through it without that assistance. And I know there's a lot more spoken about today in terms of mental health and stress. But, you know, this was, I've lost track now, this would have been 30 years ago. It wasn't talked about then. And in corporate environments I was in, it was definitely not something you talked about. So I knew that for my own mental health, I had to seek professional help. And I think the good news is that in the workplaces of today, that's more open and less looked down upon. Although I still think it's an issue in the corporate world and the senior ranks. So at least we can support one another. So my last question, go ahead, Ronelle.
No, I concur with that. I consider my therapist too, my job coach, my life coach, my business coach too. So I definitely think, you know, it's an important piece to utilize, you know, if you are having those challenges, to tap into somebody who can help you figure out that on different levels, because we're whole people, and you can't necessarily always separate career, you know, and home. It all goes together, and sometimes talking to somebody to figure out the pieces, how you can mesh them, is always good. So I'm glad you brought that up as well.
Yeah, actually, it would have been 35 years ago because it was before I've been married. I was married, so I don't know how long ago it was. So the last question I have for all of you is, what advice would you give to others regarding career transitions? I'm going to wait and see if anybody volunteers. If not, I'll call. Okay, I'll call. Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I would say surround yourself with people who are like-minded. I say every time that we have to talk about BPW, I joined in, I believe it was April 2 years ago now. So this is my second year as a member of BPW, and being around women is so refreshing. Coming from a career path where there's not a lot of women to talk to about the issues that you face, discrimination, mental health issues, navigating issues within your different work sector, of how you handle a certain issue that may come up, or a certain task that you've been delegated, you may not feel comfortable talking about it. But even though we don't all do the same job, we've all had very similar shared experiences in the workplace. So BPW has really been life-changing for me. And so anyone who's branching out, I would say, look to see if maybe you have a local BPW chapter that you can start going and getting involved in, or finding another organization where you're going to be surrounded by people that are encouraging and uplifting, no matter what the subject matter. I mean, you could find like a gardening club to join and just be surrounded by people who share similar viewpoints that can be kind of your sounding board to bounce ideas off of and to offer support, not just professional career support, but just support and being basically friends. I have made a lot of friends through BPW. So I know no matter what happens, I can call somebody and they'll be able to help me.
Tiki?
My advice would be, if you're thinking about a transition, whatever that transition may be, write it down, write down the plan you're thinking about at that moment and start doing it. Don't wait. I feel sometimes I wish I would have sped up my trajectory. So write it down, make a plan, start doing it. And, you know, I mean, if you fail at something, you're going to get back up and continue to move forward. So that's my advice.
Ronell?
I would take a combination of both Amanda and Tiki. And I would also say be vulnerable with those relationships that you build in the appropriate way. Because sometimes we want to feel that we have it all together, and sometimes we don't. And sometimes people can see what's happening around you that you can't, because they have a different eye. So being open to, as I said, build those relationships, but, maybe with a couple of those people, being vulnerable to ask, is there something that I need to be doing differently? Is there something that I need to, maybe there is some additional training. Am I approaching this way? But that circle of, your board of directors, your personal board of directors that you can call to at a moment's notice, saying, hey, this is happening to me and I need somebody to bounce some ideas off of, before I make a decision, I think is always good, because we can't always sometimes see what's right in front of us, and those around us can have a better view to give us more guidance and direction. So that would be my suggestion.
And finally, Patricia?
Well, I already mentioned the playing chess and not checkers, right? The shortest distance between 2 points is not always a straight line in the case of a career and the money that comes with it. But I think the other thing is take more risks, right? We know, I'm going to generalize, but we know that women are generally take less risks than men do. And how many of us have looked at a job description over the years and said, oh, that sounds so great, but I'm missing these 3 qualifications, so I'm not going to apply. And I will tell you, as a hiring manager for 35 years, that, that's not how men think. They look at that job description and they say, I'm gonna apply anyway. And they highlight their strengths and they explain how they'll fill those weaknesses. And as a hiring manager, if I have someone who's bringing 75% of the qualifications and they can show that they're willing and able to fill the gap, then I'm going to give them a shot. So my last piece of advice is apply anyway.
Well, that actually concludes our program for this evening. I want to thank so much Amanda, Tiki, Ronell, and Patricia for agreeing to be panelists, for sharing their experiences, and for offering some guidance and wisdom from their experiences. So I want to thank everybody else who joined us, and hopefully you found the program informative. We have recorded it, and I would say probably by next week it'll be available through the website. I don't want to push Susie Youngberg too much, because I know that Upper Keys has a major event on Wednesday night, and I'm sure as soon as this is over, the attention of the Upper Keys members is going to focus on that. Certainly all of the attention for St. Pete Pinellas is going to focus on our event on Wednesday. So thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you found it informative. And we will, I mentioned at the opening that there were 3 kinds of career transit, of transitions that women in the workplace go through. And we focused on one this evening. I think there's interest, I know at least locally, in addressing the other two. And so we'll be setting up some webinars to do that as well. So thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.